Hi, everyone. I'm Bridget Crawford. I'm the Director of Law and Policy at Immigration Equality, and I use she, her pronouns. So, what can we do is the big question that everybody's asking. And I think one of the big tools that we have in our tool belt is to know our rights so that we can make decisions that keep us and our loved ones safe and also, plan for if you or a loved one is detained. So I think, it goes without saying that encounters with law enforcement can be very scary and stressful. And I'm sure you all have seen the news reporting and maybe have witnessed some of this yourself, where ICE officers, that's Officers from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Customs and Border Protection officers use aggressive and violent tactics. Just for purposes of the presentation, I'm just going to kind of refer to everybody as ICE for ease. But there are a number of different immigration law enforcement folks that are actually enforcing the law these days. So I think it's really important to remember that we all have rights in these situations, regardless of immigration status. And you want to understand those rights so you can decide what is safest for you in your situation. I think there are rights that we should all keep in mind in any encounter. Always stay calm and don't run away. Even if you feel like you're being treated unfairly, you don't want to resist or fight with an officer, as this can make things worse. And I think we've all seen this play out in the media recently. You never want to lie to officers about your immigration status or give false or fraudulent documents or information, because that too can make things worse. However, you always have the right to remain silent, as anything you say can be used against you. For instance, if you talk about how you entered the country and your country of origin, etc. You don't have to sign anything. You can always ask that you speak to an attorney before you sign any documents. And certainly, if you don't understand what the document says, you really want to make sure that you speak to counsel first. And if you have lawful immigration status, you should carry proof of such status with you at all times. If we want to move on to the next slide. So your rights are a little bit different depending on where you are. Some of your rights are strongest within your home. So let's talk about that first. If ICE comes to your home and asks you if they can enter it, you can tell them no. And you want to make sure that your family, friends, loved ones, anyone living with you, staying at your house also knows not to open the door for ICE. In general, ICE can't enter your home without permission unless they have a specific type of judicial warrant or arrest warrant that is signed by a judge. There's a lot of confusion about this. We can provide some resources so you can see examples of a judicial warrant signed by a judge versus just an ICE warrant. If an officer tells you, I have a warrant, ask them to slip it under the door, hold it up to a window, and then you should read it carefully, which is a very hard thing to do in a stressful situation. ICE agents often have papers that look very official, but are not warrants signed by judges. They're just ICE or Department of Homeland Security documents that are signed by DHS or ICE. You want to look for a judge's signature and title on the warrant. And if a judge has not signed the form, it is not a judicial warrant, even if it has the word warrant on it. Also, if the warrant doesn't have your correct name and address on it, it's not a valid warrant to enter your house. Sometimes immigration agents come to a person's home and claim to be the police. If someone says they're a police officer, not an immigration officer, without opening your door, you can ask to see their badge. Sometimes it's hard to do depending on what type of housing you live in. But you want to look at the information on the badge to determine if they're a police officer rather than an ICE or other immigration officer. But no, even the police generally can't enter your home without permission unless they have a search warrant or arrest warrant signed by a judge. There are limitations to when they can do that. Um, just sort of a practical note, opening your door can sometimes make it easier for ICE to force their way into your home. So it also makes it harder to end a conversation with ICE. So it's best not to open the door even a little, and have any conversations through the door. You can look at the documents through a window, or the agent can slip the warrant under your door for review. If ICE enters your home anyway, you should ask them to leave unless they have a warrant signed by a judge. You can tell them, I do not consent to you being in my home. Please leave. If they start to search rooms or items in your home, repeat, I do not consent to your search. And if possible, someone should document the search by recording it, taking notes afterwards. We can talk a little bit more about this, but this might help in your legal case later. I think the way a lot of us have changed the way we do Know Your Rights presentations is largely around kind of this issue because, obviously, as Heidi pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, we're seeing excessive use of force, and we're seeing ICE not obey the law. So it's also important to keep in mind the sort of practical reality of your own safety. So while something might be your right, like recording, you also have to gauge the situation to see if you can do this safely. All right, let's move to the next slide. In public, if you're outside and you see ICE activity nearby, move to a safe place indoors. If you have proof of lawful immigration status, such as a green card, work authorization, carry it with you at all times. Even if you've filed an application with USCIS, like an asylum application, you should carry the receipt notice or the approval notice that you have, because this could help you if you have an interaction with ICE. If you're undocumented, you might not want to carry ID documents with you that indicate you're a citizen of another country or show that you are not in valid immigration status, as this information can be used against you. If ICE approaches you in public, you can always ask, are you free to leave? You can say, I don't want to talk to you right now. Am I free to go? If the answer is yes, calmly, slowly, quietly walk away. Don't run. Or it's best not to speak. If they say no, don't walk away or run. You're going to stay where you are. Respectfully ask who they are, why you're being stopped. For instance, are you a police officer? Are you an immigration officer? Why am I being stopped? Ask to see their badge and make sure you read it carefully. If they are an immigration agent and you have legal status in the United States, show them your documents. If you're a US citizen, you don't have to show your documents. However, I think in the current environment, a lot of people are choosing to carry proof of US citizenship, since we've all seen that ICE has stopped and detained citizens. If you don't have permission to be in the United States, again, you have the right to remain silent. You may refuse to answer and say, I'm exercising my right to remain silent. Again, reiterate, you don't want to carry false or fraudulent documents or lie to ICE. It's better to remain silent than to be dishonest, because that can make your situation worse. You can always ask to speak to a lawyer. You can say, I want to speak to a lawyer. You can keep repeating this if ICE keeps asking questions. And you can even say this if you don't have an attorney yet. If you are arrested and detained, you can ask for a list of free attorneys that you can reach out to. Let's move on to the next slide, because I think a lot of people have concerns around what happens if you're in your car. And obviously, with a lot of current events where we've seen ICE using dangerous and violent tactics, including breaking car windows, opening doors to pull people out, using ICE vehicles to box in cars. This is an area of anxiety for a lot of people, rightfully so. So, obviously you have rights in these situations, but vehicle encounters can be uniquely dangerous. So you want to keep your safety in mind. You always want to stay calm. You always want to keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Immediately tell ICE if there are children in the car, and try to avoid repositioning your car after the stop, as ICE might see this as you trying to flee or harm an officer, and that could potentially escalate the situation. If ICE orders you out of the car, um, you shouldn't resist by holding onto a steering wheel, holding the door shut, as this can escalate the encounter, leading to violence. But you can ask ICE why your car was stopped. Just a note of a sort of practical note, ICE officers often use unmarked cars or wear plain clothes that say police. Again, you have the right to ask the agents who they are, ask for their identification, and again, ask why you're being stopped. We get a lot of questions about rolling down windows. We used to tell people just crack your window if ICE asks you to roll down your window. I think the reality is cracking your window could prevent an ICE officer from reaching inside of your car. However, be aware that ICE might not wait for you to roll down your window and might just break the window or open the door. Um, if the officer asks you for a license and you have a valid driver's license, you should show that to the officer. State law requires you to provide a driver's license if you're driving the car in most instances. But remember, you also can exercise your right to remain silent, and you can ask to speak to an attorney before you answer any questions. Obviously, a lot of people are concerned about and interested in what they can do as bystanders. So, in a public space, you generally have the right to film anything in plain view, including law enforcement activities like ICE arrests. Now, at the same time, you should not interfere with the actions of ICE agents that you're recording. You should stay a reasonable distance away from them to avoid obstructing their work. And if they tell you to move back, it's safest to comply, document the command, and challenge it later if you believe it was unlawful. And just a note on private property, the owner can dictate where you are allowed to record. So I think, that sometimes causes issues with people too if they're on private property. Something that's really important for everybody right now is to be prepared, and to take steps if you think that you might be detained by ICE or your loved one might be detained by ICE. You should certainly make an emergency plan. And part of this plan really involves keeping important information with you at all times. Contact information for a trusted person or a loved one who can help you if you are detained. You really should try to memorize this number, or at the very least carry it with you all the time. If you have an attorney, you should try to keep that number with you too. And also medical information, including your doctor's contact information, the medications and dosages that you take. We represent a lot of HIV positive people, and a lot of folks have trouble when they're detained immediately accessing their medication, and carrying this information with you can really help. If you have kids, make sure that you have childcare information, including contact information for your child's school and a point of contact for childcare should you be detained. I just want to take a breath right now. This is so heavy and so scary. And I know that even talking about it can really create a lot of anxiety, but I do think in the long run, from clients in the past, just having a plan And doing some of this safety planning gives you peace of mind. And, hopefully you will never be in this position and never be detained. But putting this plan in action really gives you a peace of mind. You also want to make sure that you've assembled important documents. Make sure you have copies of all of your important immigration documents. If you have a criminal history, you want to make sure you gathered those documents too, and that you kept the copies in a safe place that your emergency contact or can access. You might want to get a HIPAA release signed with your emergency contact. So if somebody needs to communicate with your doctors about your care, that they are able to do that. Finances, plan for financial needs by consulting with an expert about, whether to grant a loved one, how to access your finances and make financial decisions for you, especially if you're retaining an attorney or you have childcare needs. And then obviously on the childcare front, you want to make arrangements with someone you trust to care for your children if you're detained. And we'll provide some resources at the end of the presentation that go into this in greater depth so you can really come up with the best plan for your family. If you are arrested by ICE, there are important things that you want to bring up right away. Medical needs. Be sure to tell ICE if you have special medical issues or needs. If you're diabetic, if you're HIV positive, etc. If you're searched by ICE during an arrest, note that they're generally not allowed to look in your wallet, read your papers. A search of a person is generally restricted to just, looking for weapons or possession of something illegal. You don't have to consent to a search of this kind, or a search of your cell phone. However, that's not to say that it won't happen. And so you might want to take precautions, and have a password on your cell phone and disable the Face ID feature so it's more difficult to open. If you have a fear of return to your country after you're detained, it's important for you to state that you're afraid to return to ICE and request protection in the United States. Again, we've said this a couple of times now, don't sign any document offered to you by ICE that you don't understand. You can tell the ICE officer that you will not sign a document without first talking to an attorney. If it's possible and safe for you to do so, a witness can take videos of the search or arrest so you have a record if your rights have been violated, and you can later share this with your attorney. If someone cannot safely record the encounter with ICE, you and any witnesses should write down everything you remember from the arrest or search, including the officer's badges, the patrol car numbers, which agency the officers were from. For example, if they were from Customs and Border Protection, if they were from ICE, and any other details about what happened and what was said to you, like if the officers used force or conducted a search without your consent. You should try to get contact information for witnesses too, if you can, as this might be important later in your legal case.